Now, to borrow a line from Guy Ritchie's film Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, that subliminal first picture of his, the lights are on and shining brightly for the masses, but will that continue? Let's have a talk now to an engineer working in the field of energy. His name is Andrew Kenny. He's in the studio with me in Cape Town. Andrew, the lights are on. We don't need to worry about Eskom, do we?
We certainly do. And let me just summarise it in a word what's happened. The simple thing is we simply haven't got enough power generation capacity. We didn't build power stations 20 years ago when we should have done so, and we're living with the results of those bad decisions then. So Eskom stations are right at the edge. They're running absolutely flat out. People say, oh, the demand curve since 2008 has been absolutely flat. What they mean is supply has been absolutely flat. That's all Eskom can manage to generate. It's running, the stations are being hammered into the ground. So much so that they just had to do maintenance in winter, which is very unusual this winter.
Have they managed their maintenance programme correctly, properly, responsibly?
I think they've done the best they could under the circumstances. They just couldn't take time off because we couldn't afford to take machines off. This winter they just had to. And one of the consequences of doing so, we built, after the panic of 2008, we built 14 gas turbines in Atlantis and Mossel Bay, which are cheap to build and very, very expensive to run. You don't want to run these things at all. Yeah. And recently they've been running flat out. So, for example, the fuel bill...
So draining taxpayers' money is what you're saying?
Absolutely. To give figures to it, Eskom's average selling price is about 60 cents a kilowatt hour. The cost of running these things is R3 a kilowatt hour. The first, I'm just looking at the latest half-yearly report for Eskom. A year ago, these things cost for the half year up to September 1 billion rand in fuel. The last 6 months, they cost 3.3 billion rand in fuel. That's one of the reasons why Eskom's profit is down. You don't want to be running these things, but you have to because there's nothing else to run.
Yes, but as I said, since there's been a couple of little blackouts here and there, and I don't know whether that was attributable to cable theft or what it was, but since that disaster, when was it, 2008?
2008.
2008. There's been nothing serious, and it's almost as though Eskom under-promises and over-delivers. Brian Damas is a master at that.
Brian Damas is the man who sorted out the mess. 2008 was a problem with coal supply. And as head of generation, he sorted that out. But the deeper problem is lack of capacity. That's the problem. And they've managed that quite well by these buying power from big customers and are paying them not to use their own product. And by this emergency protocol that came in last month and so forth. But this is damaging the economy. We're having to shut down smelters. South Africa should be beneficiating its raw materials.
So behind the scenes, you're saying that, in fact, if it weren't for industry playing ball with Eskom, then we would have blackouts.
We certainly would. And I've just heard that Eskom, I don't know if they're bluffing, is threatening to end their power purchase agreements.
Well, let me just read that, actually, because this is an article that came out on MoneyWeb last night at 22 minutes past 11. It says here, Eskom's power purchase agreements for 635 megawatts of generation capacity comes to an end in less than 2 weeks due to a lack of money, the utility says. This could tip the scale, rather, towards darkness in the fine balancing act the utility has to perform daily to keep the country's lights on. Is this bluffing, or is this true? Is it disturbing?
I hope that it's bluffing. Because if it's true that they're going to end these power, what are they going to do? They'll have to be either load shedding or run these gas turbines even harder, which probably will cost them more than paying people not to produce. So it's extremely serious. I think that the headline was Russian roulette. Let's hope that's what it is, that they're just bluffing.
Yeah. What happens at Christmas time? What happens at the end of the year? Everyone's, a lot of people sort of gather together. They're not at work and they're getting sick of Aunt Vera being around and eating herself to death. Do people use more energy during this stressful time?
No, they don't, fortunately. So I'm not too worried about. December I think, has the least demand of any month. What I'm much more worried about is next year, especially towards winter, because this problem just gets worse and worse. The station's running harder and harder, getting older and older, and relief only comes in the second half of next year when the first unit of Medupi, which has been much delayed by over a year or so, comes on. That'll be a huge relief, but that's second half of next year. getting through until then is going to be a huge problem.
Okay, let's have a look at the positives now. What were the positives in 2013 from your point of view? I think the leadership of Brian Darmers is one thing. What about the technicalities of it, though?
Well, I think Brian Darmers has done very well indeed, and I'm very dismayed that he's going to resign, I think, in March next year. They've just done as best as they could in very difficult circumstances to try and squeeze in the maintenance which is desperately needed, even though they're terribly short of generation.
Okay, the negatives. I mean, we've spoken about some of the negatives. In fact, let's forget the negatives because I'm in a positive mood today. 2014, you said that Medupi will come on stream, but we have probably 7 or 8 months until just to continue this fine balancing act.
Yes.
Will the balance be maintained?
I pray so. I hope so. They've done very well to maintain it up to now. But things and maybe the maintenance they've done, I think they had 9 units down in winter, usually have none down in winter. So presumably the restoration to those units is going to help a bit, but it's going to be very tough indeed.
Goodness me. Andrew, thanks very much for that sobering thought, and thanks very much for your excellent analysis. That's Andrew Kenny, who's an engineer working in the field of